Hello,
Okay.
everybody. It's Paula Connor here with Elevate Me Hub. So happy that you have joined today. It's the 19th of January, 24 hours to the big announcement. And I'm so excited that I'm here with a very dear friend of mine, Kerry K from South Africa, who I was introduced to from the Divine Feminine Roundtables I was doing last year. One of your students, I guess you could say, reached out to me and said, hey, Kerry K would be a great guest, and sent me a really cool video you have on cognitive dissonance, which I will link in the bottom of this. So it's so good to see you, Kerry.
Thank you, my darling. It's so good to be here. Thanks for inviting me on.
So, Kerry, you have, well, we all have gifts, right? We all have inherent gifts. Mine is my heart speaks to me directly, and you can read energies. Also, you work directly through the heart. But maybe you can kind of kick it off with, you know, what's your superpower? Why don't we start with that? And then let's get into what I want to kind of talk about today, if that's cool.
Okay. My superpower, no one's ever asked me that question before, so I don't know how to answer it. But the first thing that comes to mind is my superpower is that I always felt as a kid that I didn't belong. And I really worked that in my favor. I felt very different. So then I had to acknowledge that I was different. And then I went to pursue what that differentness was. And what I found was that I had this inherent connection to God. I had this inherent connection to the world of spirit. And it was aided by a mom who was very, very psychic. So when you're a kid and you have conversations at the dinner table about the color of your aura, for example, it opens up neural pathways and possibilities that I was very privileged to have as a kid. So I guess my superpower is that I never felt very 3D human. And although I am, it allowed me to pursue that part of me that is beyond the third dimensional human, and to verify that and to validate that and to connect with that. And I still use that today, every single day. I use that part of me that is of a higher nature. You might call that your soul or your higher self, perhaps even your highest self. That's where I go to connect and commune on a daily basis. So that's my normal. Whether it's a superpower or not, I don't know, but that's what's normal for me.
And do you see auras like as you walk around? Because I can say that I have seen an aura one time, and maybe I only needed to see it once to know that it was true, right? And that was my Reiki teacher well over a decade ago, and I saw her aura. And when I saw it, it kind of felt like my whole inner being was like, oh, you know what I mean? Like it was a magical moment, because the colors were,
it is magical.
They were alive and vibrant. So do you still see auras?
I see auras when I'm attuned to higher frequency. So for example, it's normally with my husband, because he's like my best friend and we talk a lot. So if we're having this cool conversation, you know how you can have these cool conversations with your bestie, and you're so in the zone with that person and you're just aligned. Very often then I'll just pause and I'll go, oh my gosh, I can see your aura, and I'll describe to him what it looks like. So it pops up visually for me when I least expect it, but at any given time I can close my eyes and I can tune into the auric field, which is nothing more than the energy field of a tree or a person or a whatever. And sometimes I feel like I see more detail with my eyes closed. It's just a nice to see when my eyes are open, but the detail is there when my eyes close.
Yeah,
it's the inner vision.
And that's what people call the psychic eye, right? The inner sight, the inner vision.
Exactly.
The pineal gland would be a good thing for lots of people to research. And now you also work with our star brothers and sisters, right?
I do. You know, this goes back to when I was a kid as well. My mom, I cannot remember how old I was, but my mom, one morning in the kitchen, I can remember it so clearly. Do you know when you've got a memory that you can even remember the smells in that exact moment? I remember that moment, and my mom's telling me about this dream she had, and everything in me goes, oh, what? Because I had the same dream. And the dream was like identical. As she described her dream, my dream was identical, which made me realize it wasn't a dream. It made me realize it was a memory, not a dream.
Mm.
But the memory slash dream was of a spacecraft landing over our swimming pool. And of us getting into the spacecraft, my mom described the people who were there, what they looked like. It was exactly as I had seen. And I loved it that happened because it was a purposeful validation for me. I've had a couple of those through my life, a purposeful validation. Because a number of people have had miraculous, otherworldly experiences that have never been validated, therefore, they don't perceive them as real. The gift for me was that I knew that that world was real. That so-called dream world was real. So my interactions with the Galactics have been happening since I was a child. And I didn't speak too much about them until 2020. That's really when I started speaking to people about the Galactics. I'm not a fan of channeling. And I never wanted to let people perceive that I'm channeling other beings, because I don't. I talk to them, I don't channel them. We have conversations and I relay my feedback from those conversations, but it's not a channeling. And I say this not because channeling is bad. There are people out there who are terrific channels. It's just not my path. I tried it. It didn't work for me. So the 2020 felt to me the pivotal point in humanity's history where they became open and available to the connections to the Galactic Federation, who is a conglomerate of star beings from not just our galaxy, but from galaxies beyond ours as well, who are 5, 6, and 7D primarily in consciousness, and they are working together to support humanity. There are some higher beings beyond 7D, but the ones with whom I interact mostly are 5, 6, and 7D, and they're very involved, highly involved in the affairs of humanity, not just from a political global perspective, but from a personal perspective. Each and every single one of us, each one of us without fail, has had some kind of galactic contact in dream state. If you're alive on planet Earth today, that's the truth for you. Most people will not remember this. I don't remember all of my dreams. I can share the ones I do remember, but nonetheless, the dream state connection from the Galactics to humanity is a very, very important part of our preparation for the interactions and the conversations that are upcoming. So everyone on a personal level has got what I call a galactic counterpart. That is a being or a group of beings assigned to them that work specifically with them. Some people, the work is respect me, and this is where the human soul will go, respect me, I don't want to do the work, in which case they'll back off completely. And others are an invitation of, yeah, I really want to do the work. What can we do? How can we move forward? There's huge enthusiasm. So there are those people who have continuing nightly interludes, continuing nightly interaction, continuing coaching from the Galactics. There are many beings for whom that is an ongoing process today. But everybody's got some kind of a galactic connection, because do you know why? We're all galactic beings.
Yeah,
We forget that. We forget
Yeah.
that. We're all galactic beings.
And that is why it's so interesting that we're having this conversation today, because tomorrow we are expecting a rather significant announcement. And so I can share that I've had 2 memories, very clear memories. One of landing on a mothership in a smaller, I'm going to call it a scout ship, because I remember waking up from the dream and going, wow, that was really advanced technology. Like, I couldn't remember like all the details, but I know that I was landing in a mothership. It was in space and it was really cool. And the other one I had wasn't that long ago, and it was in a scout ship. And we had come out of a mountain and we were looking for someone who had escaped. That's all I remember. And then, of course,
Wow.
I shared with you before, Kerry, gosh, way back in 2014, we had just gotten a cat that was 11 weeks old. My husband was in the living room. My son, who was 14, was sleeping. I'd gone to bed at about 10 o'clock, and the kitten was on my chest. It woke me up, and when I opened my eyes, I had 3 beings beside my bed. And I remember looking at them, and in my mind, I'm saying, Sean's in the living room, Keegan's in the bedroom, 1, 2, 3, who are you, right? No fear. Like it was just like I sat up, and then they slowly faded out of view, and I was like, oh, that's awesome. And that is why having dreams and imagination is so important, because it plugs us in to the bigger aspects of who we really are and makes our life experience so much richer and in wonder, curiosity, right?
Yeah, absolutely true.
So based on what you said, you talked about political and all of that. Back on August the 6th, 1945, at 8:15 in the morning, President Truman was the president of the United States. And that's actually the date that they dropped the atomic bomb in Hiroshima, in Nagasaki. This is in the Second World War. And, it's even connected to a physicist who worked on the Manhattan Project. I'll leave his name in a link too. I should have written it down. But he was the one that made the atomic bomb. And then they dropped another one on August the 9th, a few days later. So 2 atomic bombs. And I bring this up because I remember intel that when we did that, we actually affected civilization off planet. We killed beings, life, sentient life on other planets. Because I understand, well, that the Galactics do not interfere. It's kind of like the Star Trek Prime Directive, right? Never interfere with a civilization that's evolving and growing in their own consciousness. Don't interfere. But because we had destroyed life on other planets, I was aware that 2 groupings came to talk to the leaders on this planet. Now, of course, there was things that Hitler was doing in Antarctica and with channeling, Madame I can't remember him, Blavatsky. I'm not saying her name right, but
Blavatsky.
Thank you. They were doing things, but I'm aware that Truman was contacted by the Pleiadian group, this 7th Pleiadian group, and offered spiritual guidance on how to disarm, stop the nuclear thing, will help the Canadians, will help the world evolve spiritually. And he either said, go rub salt or my hands are tied. And then another group of beings came, known as the Greys, and they basically traded technology for, what I understand, the right for them to do some testing, DNA testing, genetic testings, and abductions. So I thought that would be a fun place to start, because it takes us all the way back to the 40s. And also introduces why they are now more present than ever, because it feels to me, and this is what we covered in our class just this week, humanity is at a point where they're reaching an apex point where it's either you're going to annihilate yourselves or choose the light. And we're kind of at that apex now. So what would your beloved jam,
So the first thing I want to say is this. When you give me that whole rundown, that whole behind the scenes look at the history of planet Earth, and then you ended off by saying, I thought it would be fun to start with this, it makes me realize that's why she's my friend, because that's my kind of fun. Most people would run away from this topic screaming, but this is where I would dive in and get really, really excited. So it's an awesome conversation to have. There's something, Paula, called the law of the boomerang. And the law of the boomerang is this. Everything in creation naturally wants to align itself to good. It's kind of like being aligned to the natural North Pole. It's just an inevitability that everything in creation would want to.
It's like a self-correcting system. It's so perfect.
Well said.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, well said. So the law of the boomerang is such that when somebody puts an energy into creation that is of true sinister intent, the boomerang in some way will attempt to reverse that negativity. It will attempt to correct, to self-correct, and turn that negative intention into a positive outcome. In the 40s, the law of the boomerang was still there. It just took a long time for that boomerang to come around. And when it did come around, the result of it was always positive for humanity. Now, as we live in 2020, everything has sped up. The boomerang comes around a lot quicker. However, part of the boomerang of that whole event with nuclear bombs was that it brought the Galactics to break Prime Directive as we know it to be, to break that. That was the boomerang right there. And suddenly they had recourse. Suddenly they had not just a pathway to interact with humanity, but it now became necessary that they intervened. It was now a karmic duty or responsibility that our galactic family had to step in on the scene. They still weren't going to do it publicly. They still weren't going to come on our TV screens and go, hey, everybody. But they had to begin working in earnest with the affairs and the ongoings of humanity. So on a governmental, political level, they've absolutely intervened. They intervene as little as possible. But where they've intervened, and perhaps this will assure a lot of people, where they've intervened in terms of nuclear warfare, is that it is not possible on our planet. It will not happen. The way that it's been explained to me is, it is absolutely never an option on planet Earth. We were given our chance at playing with atomic weaponry. We were given our chance. We went ahead, crossed the line, and we will never cross that line again. There's so many stories of people within military personnel who are working with nuclear weaponry who report how suddenly a bomb was deactivated. Suddenly an operation that they had planning just failed, although everything was so perfectly prepared and planned. That is the intervention of our galactic family. There will be no nuclear war, even if you hear the threat of it. There will be no nuclear war. That is the promise of our galactic family to humanity, and it's the very reason why they stepped in and intervened as they did. There will be no more atomic war or nuclear weaponry of any kind being used on planet Earth.
Yeah, I heard a number of those stories too, where all the electronics would just shut down, the communication would shut down. How many sightings of pilots where they've witnessed craft being beside? And of course that would make sense, because if we are a bunch of children, maturity wise, playing with machine guns in the sandbox, we're going to hurt some people.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's not
exactly.
And this seems, as I say, so interesting, because one day before, I kind of have a feeling in my being that, I have a feeling that we're going to learn very, very quickly about our star brothers and sisters, and how they are very much here with to make sure that those that wish to maintain control on this planet will, because that is not the divine plan. It is about time that we get to wake up and realize that we are all children of love, and stop doing what we're doing to each other. Like, basically we've found ways to sell each other and profit from each other that are really quite awful when you think about it. I mean, I've just about witnessed enough humans hurting other humans, which is why this great awakening.
And the tragedy of that then, see, the tragedy of that whole way in which humanity has treated themselves as well as their fellow man, is that this is what they were ushered into. We were, in a sense, enslaved without realizing we were enslaved, brainwashed without realizing we were being brainwashed, programmed without realizing we were being programmed. So we thought this is the nature of mankind. Huh, it's a terrible nature. That's never, ever been true.
Yeah.
Ever. And I can say to you, because so many times I've gone to the Galactics and had these heart-wrenching moments of my own human story where a personal friendship implodes, or I feel betrayed, or whatever. I've said to them, you know, why all of this effort to save humanity? Because humanity is not really nice. They're really not nice people. They don't treat each other with kindness. They don't treat each other with love. And I think we've all experienced to some degree or another that sense of hopelessness when we see the way in which humans behave. And what's always, always been reflected back to me is their compassion for humanity. And I've realized over the years that the reason that they hold such empathy and such compassion for us is because they know it's not our true nature. They know that that behavior is the product of being blindfolded, programmed, and manipulated. That's how it expresses itself. Because that's what's been done to humanity. So our very nature is to repeat, almost in some kind of a fractal pattern. Our very nature is to repeat what we're shown, to repeat what has been woven into the fabric of our creation, which is that we've been fed upon, preyed upon, misled, misguided. You know, the average day of a salesperson is to do a very similar thing, but to get rewarded with it with a paycheck. So it's very easy to look at the big monsters in our world and to go, oh, you know, these are the bad guys, without realizing, hold on a minute, we have become what they are. The bad parent is always enacted through the child. In other words, the child becomes the abusive parent. That's what we've done in terms of our relationship with the negative beings who were controlling our planet. We've become like them, but it is never, ever our nature. And that is what I've always seen when I connect with the Galactics, is that reminder. Remember, Kerry, this is not the truth of who they are. Remember that this is a product of their pain. It's a product of their trauma. So they've really supported me in connecting always to the pure, innocent hearts of humanity, to see beyond the programming, to know that that's not their truth, and to be able to find that part of them that still exists in the pure essence of God light. And it's a skill to master. It is a skill to master. It's a valuable skill for all of us to master, that we enable ourselves to see the light even when it's not presented to us, even when it's not obvious. It's there anyway.
Yeah, you're describing, so essentially we're born into a reality, call it a matrix, if you will. Born into a reality. The energy of fear is already present. The energy of suffering is already present. We're taught from babes, this is the way it is. You know, money doesn't grow on trees. The historical lineage that our ancestors experienced, which is preyed upon, and then how the controllers maintain that facade is through the separated ego mind, the ego mind that thinks she or he is separate from source, from each other. Because to your point, it's absolutely right. It is not human nature. If there is a car accident on the highway and a car is in trouble, every single human being will get out of their cars and run to that individual's aid without question. They're like, oh no, they're the wrong color, they pray to the wrong God, they live in the wrong country. None of that. So when, and it's the same as epigenetics, right? Above the gene, it's the environment. So when you put in an individual, you know, it was so funny. I was shown a picture so I know that this isn't me, the psychic pictures they give me. So I know that the pictures that are given.
Yeah. Thanks.
Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yeah, I've got you. Thanks.
Little bit of a blip in the internet. I'm now, we talked about superheroes, right? So I have clear knowing. I don't know how I know stuff. I just know it. And I get pictures. I get a lot of images. And I know it's not me now because I'm just not smart enough to come up with these images. And what I was shown on the weekend was, imagine the most ferocious monster, like a reptilian dinosaur being kind of thing, who is absolutely ferocious. And what they showed me was inside of that being was this beautiful angel. It was a man, beautiful man, and I could see the angel wings, and that was the being that was inside. And it was almost like all of the hatred and comments as that being sojourned through their soul incarnations added layers and layers of skin, and then armor, and then scales. And that fear and frightening and the way they were treated is kind of what eventually manifested in the external shell based on the environment that they were put in. But inside that being was still. So it's like people are looking for God in all the wrong places, behind the refrigerator, down in the, in the forest and stuff. And it's in your heart, but we have to claim that, right? We have to say, I want a relationship with you. Otherwise it lies dormant. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I would say, yes, it would be fair to say, from the human perspective, to, as if we're speaking to God, to be able to say, I want this relationship with you. But perhaps what's more valuable is, before we request that relationship, to connect within, to nurture the primary relationship that we have with ourselves. The most neglected relationship that we have is the relationship to self. And then we don't necessarily read the mirror, because then we go to our lovers, our partners, our world, and we say, why don't you give me any attention? Why do you betray me? Or why do you ignore me? Without realizing that so often it's because we've got a blind spot that we can't see, where we're ignoring ourselves, where we are, in a sense, dismissing ourselves. So the primary relationship is the connection to self. And when that primary relationship is in place, the connection to Source God is as natural as breathing. You wouldn't even ask for it. You would know that you are it. So to further your point, it is to look within. It is to look in the place that everyone actually knows to look, but for whatever reason, they don't. They get spoken out of it. They talk themselves out of it. They implement logic. Logic tells them to look up in the clouds, or the astrology, or the moon, or the stars, or wherever it is, except within. So this primary relationship with self has been shown to me over and over again with the Galactics. And I posted something on my Telegram group just yesterday. And I said to them, here we are, us humans, getting ourselves in a frenzy, because we're going, oh, the 20th of January is approaching. Something big's going to go down. So you would think that the Galactics, based on how humans are behaving, you'd think maybe the Galactics are going to be doing the same thing, kind of going, all hands on deck, this is it, people, emergency, emergency, it's all going down now. And it's nothing like that. No. At this time, the Galactics are so calm. So if anybody says to you, because I've heard these messages, if anybody says to you, the Galactics say, we've really got to do something urgent right now, they don't operate from urgency.
No.
A 5D being doesn't do urgent in the way that the anxious human does. No. Nonetheless, the Galactics right now are so calm and present and stable and anchoring in the God light consciousness into their bodies, into the earth. The state of peace and calm that they're in right now is the only thing that I've seen escalating.
Yeah.
Not their panic, not their frenzy. So it would be a really viable idea for us as humans to consider the same thing, not just now, but for all time. for all time, to have impact, to be a catalyst for change. We think of that as, whoa, I've got to roll my sleeves up and get busy. I've got to do some serious doing here. And it's not necessarily the case. It's often I've got to be the seriousness of my being. I've got to be in serious beingness. I've got to be in presence.
I want to pause you there and go back a little bit, because going back to the looking within. Now, I often ask my clients, do you love you? Sometimes, which is an interesting answer. And I think the reason why potentially folks are a little reluctant to look within is because they may have aspects of themselves that they're ashamed of. The shadow aspect of themselves, parts of themselves that perhaps have behaved in ways that now they look at and that may be a little bit embarrassed about. But what I would encourage folks to understand is that as soon as you start to look at stuff, you can start to change it. And once you feel it, it heals it like right away. And when you do start to foster that relationship, because what you were talking about, the Galactics escalating in calm, I have to tell you, I've never felt so excited, but a very calm, still excitement. It's almost like, well, what they're showing me right now is like one of my favorite things is thunderstorms. And it's that moment where the clouds are very there, and then all of a sudden, the wind stops completely. It's almost like I feel like I'm in the eye of the storm.
Exactly.
And when you start to look at your own stuff, your inner world, that is actually when the relationships around you start to improve significantly, because you know what your is and you know what their stuff is, and it doesn't get entangled anymore.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you're right.
So,
that's the doorway to heaven, through the heart.
It is. It is.
Self first.
Yeah.
And it kind of feels like that's where we're at as a collective right now, is humanity is being given an opportunity to see where they've denied love, not only within themselves, but what we've done as a collective.
Yeah. A lot of people, you talk about the shadow, and I've spent a lot of time understanding the shadow, working with the shadow, and realizing that it is because of the shadow that humanity doesn't connect with themselves in the way that we would want them to. And for so many people, there's an underlying theme of, I feel fraudulent. I feel fraudulent. I feel like a fraud. Whether they've got a degree, whether they are seen in a certain social standing, wherever they are in their lives. So, not everyone, but so many people experience a level of shame associated with the false idea that they are fraudulent in some way. So I've got a client of mine who's got numerous degrees and very well respected in her field. And she says, Kerry, every day I go to work, I feel like a fraud because I don't know what I'm doing, but my pieces of paper tell everyone that I know what I'm doing, but I don't feel it on the inside. And this is what happens when we live a lie. When we live a lie, we feel fraudulent because we are not congruent on the inside with what we express on the outside. So then we build a shame and a fearful shame of being discovered by the world around us for being untrue to what we're representing. So humanity is left in a kind of a quandary. And the quandary is, look, I want this relationship to self. I want to love myself. I want all of these things. But I don't want to go through the heart, because if I go through the heart, I have to get real and zone in on those things I don't want to see because I'm afraid that they're true. So the first thing that humanity needs to remember is that all of that, which we would call the shadow, which we would call the false self, all of that is created in innocence. That's an imperative thing to remember. The false self is not the bad self. It is the innocent self that was doing the best that they could at that time under very abnormal conditions. That's where we were born. We were born to a highly dysfunctional and abnormal world that our parents, our teachers, the world around us told us was perfectly normal, so we believed them. Therefore, we felt as if we were abnormal, not the world around us. We took it all as if it were us that was somehow wrong. So here we've got this quandary of we need to connect within, but we don't want to go through that perceived darkness.